Welcome to our deep dive. Today we are taking a close look at a singular, incredibly powerful source, which is this week's sermon from our pastor.
Yeah, and it was quite a message, really deeply reflective.
It really was. Our mission today is to unpack this breathtaking story from 2 Kings chapter 7. We want to figure out what a 3,000-year-old siege has to do with that quiet sense of resignation so many of us feel right now.
Right, that feeling of just being stuck.
Exactly. We want to uncover the practical life applications hidden in this ancient text. How to overcome spiritual despair, the unbelievable power of taking just one small step, and how God actually echoes our weakest movements.
It is a beautiful narrative, but where do you want to start?
Well, before we even look at the historical text, I have to ask you about something so mundane that the pastor brought up, because it really just stuck with me all week.
Oh, the phone analogy.
Yes. I was looking around on my commute this morning, and it struck me how many times a day we all just instinctively reach for our screens. I mean, we pick up our phones the very second we wake up.
We really do.
We hold onto them tightly until the absolute moment we fall asleep.
It is the defining posture of our modern generation, isn't it? I mean, we are constantly swiping, constantly pulling down on the screen to refresh the page, just searching that glowing rectangle for something, anything really, to fill the quiet.
And as we learned from the pastor's message, it is not simply a search for information.
No, not at all.
When we constantly check and refresh our screens, it is actually this desperate, often contradictory hope that something in our lives will finally change.
We are looking for a new message, right? A new notification.
Right. We're hoping today will be different, yet tragically at the exact same time, our hearts are slowly coming to a stop with resignation.
That is the paradox of modern life right there. We are hyperactive on the surface, but internally, we are just shutting down. We refresh our screens dozens of times a day, but deep inside, we are losing the expectation that life itself can actually change. We just tell ourselves, well, this is just life, or, you just have to endure it.
It feels exactly like pulling the handle of a broken slot machine.
Wow, yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Like we keep yanking it out of habit, going through the motions, desperately hoping for a different result. But internally, we've already given up.
We secretly know the machine is broken.
Exactly. We've accepted it, but we just don't know what else to do with our hands. We're just quietly surrendering.
And those words we say to ourselves, this is just life, they might sound casual on the surface, but if you listen closely to a friend saying that, or even, to your own internal monologue, there is a deep, quiet despair hidden inside those words.
So true.
Human beings cannot survive long without hope. That quiet surrender is exactly what we are facing under the crushing weight of modern life. We live in these cities that just never stop running.
Right, the pressure is immense.
The rent, the living expenses in places like New York City, the anxiety over our health, the constant worry about our children's futures, these realities just press down on us.
But I want to push back on that for a second.
Sure.
It is really easy to say this is a modern problem, right?
Yeah.
Caused by modern anxiety and smartphones and inflation.
Oh, absolutely.
But from the pastor's sermon, the fascinating parallel was to a literal physical shutting down thousands of years ago. We are talking about the ancient siege of Samaria.
Right. And a siege is a very specific type of warfare.
Yeah.
The pastor brought us to the city of Samaria, which was entirely surrounded by the Syrian king Ben-Hadad.
And the siege wasn't just a normal battle.
No, it wasn't just a standard battlefield clash. It was a slow, agonizing suffocation. The enemy doesn't even have to attack your walls. They just camp outside and cut off your supply lines.
They just wait.
Exactly. They cut off your food, your water, your connection to the outside world. They essentially just wait for you to starve yourself into submission.
Which perfectly mirrors that internal shutting down we just talked about. The enemy of our souls doesn't always mount a massive, dramatic attack on us.
Right.
Often it's just a slow cutting off of our spiritual oxygen until we just surrender. And the economic devastation inside Samaria that the pastor described in the passage, it was just shocking to hear.
The inflation was unimaginable.
An unclean donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver.
Mm.
By today's minimum wage standards, as the pastor calculated for us, that is around $43,000.
Unbelievable.
$43,000 for a donkey's head. and dove's dung was selling for 5 shekels.
It reveals the total collapse of societal value. When you are starving, the things you once considered completely worthless or even entirely unclean and forbidden, well, they suddenly become your only focus. They were swallowing anything just to survive.
But here's where I really had to pause and wrestle with the reality of it. The passage goes on to record the horrifying extreme of this human collapse, where people were literally consuming their own children to survive.
Yeah. It is absolutely horrifying to even think about.
It is. But I really want to understand the mechanism here.
Right.
How does a society go from being a functional, normal city to that level of unimaginable darkness?
That is the big question.
Does a crisis like that create the darkness within people, or does it just reveal how spiritually starved they already were?
I think that is the crucial question, yes. Starvation, whether physical or spiritual, it strips away the polite veneer of society. It doesn't necessarily create the darkness out of nowhere. It exposes the fact that their moral and spiritual foundation was already completely hollow.
Wow.
When the future is completely sacrificed just to satisfy the agonizing pain of the present moment, dignity dies. The conscience dies.
So they were already empty.
Exactly. The hearts of the people had already collapsed long before the physical food ran out. In order to survive the immediate moment, people abandoned their humanity.
So did the siege just expose the fact that they had already been seeking their satisfaction in the wrong things, like in their bank accounts, their military walls, their personal achievements, instead of in God?
Yes, exactly. It reveals the famine that was already there. As the pastor shared with us, this connects directly to the prophet Amos, chapter 8, verse 11.
Right, I remember that reference.
In that passage, Amos spoke of a coming famine. Not a famine of food or a thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. And if we look around at today's generation, we are so full. We have overflowing information, advanced technology, constant digital connection.
We have everything.
We have access to every piece of human knowledge right in our pockets, yet we are absolutely starving. We are starving from a famine of the Word of God.
And when you are starving spiritually, you lose your empathy. You lose your connection to your community. You start consuming your relationships just to feed your own immediate emotional needs.
You just use people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have this city, completely devoid of hope and human dignity, where human calculation and strength have entirely failed. And this is where the story pivots so beautifully, because God's spotlight suddenly shifts.
It moves away from the center of power.
Yes. It doesn't shift to the powerful king inside the city, or to the strong military commanders analyzing strategy in a war room. It shifts to the absolute edge of despair. It shifts to the ultimate outsiders.
Yes, the spotlight moves to the city gate. We are introduced to 4 men with leprosy sitting outside the walls.
And we really need to understand what that meant back then. They weren't just sick, right?
Right. In that culture, leprosy wasn't just a medical diagnosis, it was a social and religious death sentence. They were considered ceremonially unclean.
So they were completely cut off.
Completely. That meant they could not enter the temple to worship, they could not touch their family members, and they were legally forbidden from living inside the city walls. They are boundary dwellers.
Boundary dwellers.
Socially, relationally, and economically, their very existence has been pushed aside. They are quite literally trapped between the starving, locked city behind them and the enemy army in front of them.
What struck me so deeply from the pastor's sermon is how incredibly relatable that feeling of being a boundary dweller is today.
Oh, absolutely.
Obviously, we aren't dealing with ancient leprosy, but that profound sense of rejection and isolation. You can be standing inside a crowded church or sitting at a dining table with your own family or working in a busy office and still feel entirely, completely alone.
It's so true.
Outwardly, you are among people, but inwardly, you feel like an outcast. You feel unclean or unworthy of real connection.
It is a profound modern loneliness. But right there, in that place of absolute rejection, these 4 men do something remarkable. They ask a vital, life-changing question.
Why should we sit here waiting to die?
Exactly. They look at their situation and realize the supreme danger of sitting here.
What does sitting here really mean in our context today?
Sitting here means settling down in your despair. It means becoming accustomed to a dead condition. We get so used to not praying.
Wow, yeah.
We get so used to not expecting anything from God, not fighting for our marriages, and not loving others. We adapt to the darkness because moving seems too painful or, frankly, too risky.
And I struggled with this part of the narrative, honestly.
Why is that?
Well, if I'm starved, sick, and cast out by my own people, Why would I risk walking toward an enemy army? That doesn't sound like faith to me. It sounds like a suicide mission. Why does God seem to bypass the kings and the strong and wait to spark a miracle through the weakest people, the ones who literally had nothing left to lose?
Because when human strength completely collapses, that is the exact moment people finally become small enough to see God.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Think about the king and his generals inside the city. They were still relying on the walls. They were still trusting their own abilities, their own calculations. When our own calculations work out, we trust our resumes. We trust our bank accounts.
We trust ourselves.
Right. But when we are pushed to the very edge, when every earthly safety net is gone and there is absolutely nothing left to hold on to, we finally seek him. The lepers had no illusions of saving themselves. Their realization that they couldn't just sit there anymore leads us to the most important spiritual principle of the entire message: faith is movement.
Faith is movement. That is such a powerful shift in perspective, because I think so often we believe we need everything figured out first.
We want the whole roadmap.
Yes. We think faith is having this triumphant certainty or an absolute guarantee of the outcome before we take a single step. We think faith means the total absence of fear.
But it isn't. As the pastor shared with us, these 4 lepers didn't have some extraordinary theological confidence. They were starving, weak, and probably terrified.
They were just exhausted.
They were likely trembling. But they took those weak, dragging footsteps toward the Aramean camp anyway. They just moved their bodies toward God's providence, even when their hearts were shaking. And what does God do with that tiny movement?
He amplifies it. God took those tiny, dragging footsteps of 4 sick men and amplified them. To the Syrian army, God made those shuffling feet sound like the thunderous approach of a mighty army of chariots and horses.
It's incredible.
It feels exactly like stepping up to a microphone in an empty, massive stadium. You just supply this fragile, barely there whisper of an effort. You just drag your feet forward.
Right, but you're forgetting who is running the soundboard in that stadium.
Oh, I love that.
You supply the whisper, but God plugs that whisper into a heavenly sound system that shakes the literal walls of the enemy's camp.
That is amazing. And we see this dynamic throughout the entirety of Scripture, don't we? Think of the examples we were reminded of. David's tiny, smooth stone going up against a giant like Goliath. A widow dropping her 2 small copper coins into the offering. A young boy offering his incredibly humble lunch of a few loaves and fishes.
Exactly. The world looks at these things, a stone, 2 pennies, a boy's lunch, the weak footsteps of 4 outcasts, and calls them small, insignificant, or even pathetic. But God moves history through them.
Because we decide the direction of our footsteps, but God decides the magnitude of the echo.
Let me say that again. We decide the direction. God decides the echo.
That is so freeing. It really takes the pressure off of us to perform a miracle.
Yeah.
We don't have to generate the thunder. We just have to take the step.
Just one step.
We just have to take one small step toward praying again. One trembling step toward forgiving someone who hurt us. One weak step toward opening our Bible when we feel completely disconnected.
And look at the result in the story. When those 4 men finally arrive at the enemy camp, they discover that God's echo has completely cleared the way. The Syrians had fled in absolute terror from the sound of the chariots, leaving behind all their provisions, incredible abundance.
Just sitting there.
Food, silver, gold, and clothing just waiting for them. But the story doesn't end with their personal survival. If it did, it would just be a nice historical anecdote. This is where the pastor's message shifts to the true ultimate purpose of grace.
Right, because initially their deeply ingrained human lack takes over. The text shows they go from tent to tent. They eat, they drink, and they begin hoarding the gold and silver, hiding it away in the dirt.
Which makes sense.
It makes complete sense. If you have been starving your entire life, human nature makes you cling so tightly to what you finally find.
It is the ultimate survival instinct. And poverty of the soul works the exact same way as physical poverty. If you have been emotionally starved, you hoard affection.
That's a profound point.
A person who has lacked love will cling desperately to it, almost suffocating the relationship. A person who has lacked recognition becomes entirely addicted to approval. When we finally experience a breakthrough, our first instinct is to build a fortress around it and keep it for ourselves.
But then a profound realization hits these 4 men. They stop, they look at each other, and they say, what we are doing is not right. They realize that hoarding this abundance while the city behind them is still starving does not align with the will of God.
And that is the turning point of the human conscience. The deeper meaning here is that grace is never given just to make us comfortable.
That part made me reflect so deeply on my own life. It really makes you realize how modern faith has become so terribly self-centered.
It really has.
We focus almost entirely on my blessing, my peace, my healing, my personal breakthrough. We treat God's grace like a personal wellness program.
Like a spa treatment.
Exactly.
Yes.
It is a radical, almost uncomfortable shift to realize that our healing is actually meant to be ammunition for someone else's survival. True grace is not meant to be hoarded in a hidden tent.
Never. The grace of God is designed to flow outward. God did not simply call us to survive. He called us to become people who give life to others. True restoration is only complete when the comfort we receive becomes someone else's hope.
So true.
These lepers, the very outcasts who were rejected by society, realize they have to go back to the locked, starving city and share the good news. They become the saviors of the people who cast them out.
And doesn't that completely redefine how we view our community? And even how we view the church?
Absolutely.
The church isn't a gathering of unbroken, perfect people who have it all together and just sit around celebrating their own purity. It's a gathering of people who almost died.
Wow. Yes.
People who were starving at the gates, who were sick and desperate, but who experienced a completely unearned grace and are now returning to save the city.
It changes everything about how we walk through those doors on Sunday. You aren't just there to consume another message for your own benefit. Your survival, your testimony of how God amplified your weak steps, is the very food that a starving generation desperately needs to hear.
It really does change everything. It turns our private relief into a public rescue mission.
That's a beautiful way to say it.
Thank you. As we close our time together today, I want to remind you of a moment of pure wonder from the pastor's message that brought me so much profound comfort. If you look closely at the timeline in the scripture, God was already shaking the Syrian army before the lepers even took their very first step.
It was already moving.
Before they even gathered the courage to stand up, before they even asked the question about sitting there to die, God was already working. He is holding on to us before we even begin to pray again.
That is the beauty of his providence. He is already making a way in the wilderness. He is already terrifying the enemy that is besieging your life. Faith is simply turning ourselves once again toward the God who is already at work on our behalf.
So I want to leave you with this thought to mull over today. Think about the specific area in your life where you have quietly surrendered. That place where you have decided to just sit and wait because you're too exhausted to hope or too afraid of being disappointed again.
We all have those areas.
If you didn't have to worry about the final results, knowing that God perfectly controls the echo and the outcome, what would your one tiny, trembling step forward look like today?